The fisherman cast his nets, but the river gave him something ancient, cruel, and miraculous all at once. In the drowned silence before sunrise, the widower Mwanza guided his old wooden boat into the mist, as he had every morning for nearly 2 decades. The world was still half asleep, wrapped in the hushed hum of insects and the low breath of moving water. The smell of mud, wet reeds, and old wood filled his lungs like a ritual. He cast the nets with practiced care. The ropes hissed in the dark, slicing through fog and memory. The water swallowed them whole without a splash, leaving ripples that vanished as quickly as they came. For years, Mwanza had fished this same stretch of river, the same current that had once carried his laughter, and later, his grief. On some mornings, when the wind came from the south, he could almost hear Amina's voice drifting through the reeds, humming the tune she used to sing while cleaning fish. "My stubborn old man," she always called him, her laugh shimmering like light on the tide. But Amina's voice had gone silent years ago, carried away by the same waters he still called home. Since then, Mwanza's life had narrowed to 3 things: the river, the silence, and the ache that lived inside his ribs. The villagers still nodded when he passed their houses, buckets in hand, his back bent but steady. They whispered to their children, "That's the old man of the river. Careful, he talks to ghosts," and perhaps he did. After all, solitude does strange things to a wounded heart. He slept in a small mud and straw hut where the wind slithered through the cracks like a thief. Nights were long, the fire small. The laughter that once filled that kitchen had faded into the creak of an empty chair. In the evenings, Mwanza would sit at the doorway, pipe half lit, and stare at the glimmering black surface of the river. It was the only thing that still answered when he spoke. "You took her," he'd murmur, "but you never gave her back." Sometimes, when the nets returned empty and his boat drifted in circles, Mwanza imagined the river whispering in reply, something about patience, about mysteries hidden beneath the surface. He was a man shaped by grief and seasons. Worn hands, coarse hair gone gray, a face carved by the sun. He lived not because it was beautiful to live, but because he did not know how to stop. Fate, however, doesn't ask permission. Some mornings it simply arrives. The sunrise that followed was ordinary enough. The world glowed gold on the river's skin. Birds circled lazily overhead, and the fisherman rowed out as always to meet his solitude. The oar groaned against the wood. He muttered his small prayer, the one Amina used to whisper beside him, half blessing, half apology, then dropped his nets again. But instead of the soft give of current and fish, the ropes went still, heavy, wrong. He frowned, braced one foot on the planks, and began to pull. The lines resisted as if the river itself had closed its fist around them. The boat tilted. Water sloshed against his calf. He grunted, heart slowing to match the drag of the weight. When at last the net broke the surface, it came up not with the flutter of scales, but as a dark, tangled bundle wrapped in rags. Mwanza blinked against the glare. His breath caught somewhere between prayer and curse. He thought for a sick moment that he had dredged up a corpse. Then the bundle moved. A thin, impossible cry broke the morning. He dropped the oar. The sound was fragile, half gasp, half plea, but alive. Trembling, he hauled the net over the side. The bundle rolled open in his lap. A baby, slick with river water, still tied at wrists and waist with frayed scraps of cloth. Sweet Lord. His throat closed around the words. The child's skin was pale and cold, the lips faintly blue, the breath faint as mist. But she was breathing. Still breathing. The fisherman's calloused hands shook so badly he almost dropped her. With rough fingers suddenly gentle, he undid the knotted cloths. The cord left red marks along her tiny arms. The first thing he did was strip off his thick shirt, wrapping her inside it, and pressing her against his chest for warmth. The baby stirred. A small sigh escaped her lips, followed by a weak cry. Somewhere between that noise and the beating of his heart, something inside Mwanza shifted. A soundless crack deep within, where grief had lived airtight for years. He looked up at the sky, blinking rain or tears from his eyes. The wind had died. The river shimmered strangely calm, as if in witness. "If the Lord sent you to me," he whispered, "then maybe he hasn't finished with me yet." He rowed back harder than he ever had. Each stroke was a vow. Whatever she was, whoever had cast her away, she would not die today. When he reached shore, villagers spotted him running barefoot along the path. Water dripping from his clothes, the small bundle clutched tight against his chest. They stared in disbelief. "Old Mwanza's lost his mind," one woman hissed to another. The rivers cursed him. "That's no blessing, it's a trap." He ignored them all. He kicked open the door of his hut, the wind swinging the reed mat aside. Inside, the fire had long since collapsed into ash. He fell to his knees beside the hearth and blew gently until orange life returned to the coals. The room filled with smoke and warmth again. He placed the child close to the fire, rubbing her tiny hands, drying her damp hair with the edge of a blanket. She was indeed a girl, small, fierce in her fragility. Her chest rose and fell unevenly, but it rose. Mwanza stared at her for a long time, heart thunderous in the quiet. "You came from the waters," he said softly, "but you are not theirs anymore." The baby yawned, wrinkled her face, and fell asleep as if she'd always known safety there. He sat beside her all day and all night, feeding the fire whenever it dimmed, watching the rhythm of her breath. Outside, the village murmured and gossiped, the river whispered endlessly to the shore, but inside his house, time slowed to something sacred. When the infant's breathing evened, Mwanza exhaled for the first time in hours. Fear still wrapped his chest. What if she was sick? What if someone came looking for her? What if the river had sent him a burden instead of a blessing? Yet deeper than fear, something older was beating, a desire as steady as the water itself. Hope. By dawn, the storm in his soul had softened into quiet resolve. The baby slept wrapped in his old coat, her tiny fist curled near her cheek. The fisherman sat watching her with the unease of someone who had forgotten how this kind of tenderness felt. The fire flickered on his tired face, highlighting lines carved by loneliness. He thought of Amina. "If you could see this, my love, you'd laugh at me. You'd say the river can still surprise even an old fool." He brushed a trembling hand against the child's forehead. The skin was warm now. "You'll need a name," he murmured. "Something that belongs to the light, not the water." But the right word didn't come yet. So he simply whispered, "Rest! You're safe now." Outside, the wind carried the hum of the river across the shore. Not cruel this time, almost like a lullaby. That night, for the first time in years, Mwanza didn't dream of Amina, or of nets pulling up empty, or of waves swallowing what he loved. He dreamed of a quiet cradle rocking in rhythm with the tide, and a small voice laughing somewhere beyond the mist. He woke before dawn to add wood to the fire. The child stirred, opened her eyes, dark, bright, unafraid, and in that instant the old fisherman realized what the river had truly returned to him. Not a miracle, not a curse, a reason to live. He dreamed of the future of the child the river had given him. Alive, breathing, now sleeping like a promise in his callous hands. The rumor spread like fire through dry grass. Before noon, every mud door was already repeating the same phrase. With wide eyes and crosses drawn on foreheads, old Mwanza found a child in the water. The quail market became a whirlwind of voices. Donna Zawadi, who sold corn fritters, swore she saw the fisherman arrive with a bundle clutched tightly to his chest. Mamia, always in a rush, said it was a sign of disaster. Boba Kito, the elder with a white beard, simply closed his eyes and took a deep breath, as if hearing an ancient warning riding the wind. At Sifu, the blacksmith's forge, the young men set their hammers aside to argue. "The river doesn't give back anything without asking a price," said Juma, spitting on the ground. "A curse!" replied Baraka, arms crossed. But Asha, the midwife, lifted her chin. "The real curse is a heart that shuts the door to a baby." Her words rang through the air like hot metal in cold water. And for a moment the rumor lost its strength. Across the square, Mama Chiku, sharp-tongued as ever, climbed 2 steps on her porch and declared, for all to hear, that it could only be a bad omen who brings a child from the river brings along the spirit of the water. Some made the sign of protection. Others approached Mwanza's hut with a mix of fear and curiosity, like those who watch a storm from behind a window. When Mwanza opened the door, morning light cut across the simple interior of the house. He held the girl, now wrapped in a clean cloth, her skin warmed by the low-burning fire. People stepped back, and the murmurs turned into a buzz of bees. Asha stepped forward and entered. She touched the baby's forehead, smelled the old cloth strips, still marked with bindings. Her eyes met the fisherman's, and she nodded firmly. "She's alive. That's what heaven concerns itself with." Mama Chiku, irritated by the reverent silence, raised her voice. "This isn't a good thing. The river gave her back because he didn't want the curse." Mwanza straightened, his face weathered by sun and years, and replied, not shouting, but with the quiet force of someone speaking from deep within their soul. "If the river gave her to me, it's because heaven allowed it." The phrase hit the ground like an anchor. For a second, even the birds seemed to listen. Babakito stepped forward slowly. He looked at the child, looked at Mwanza, and then looked at the crowd. "Not all water that comes is a flood. Sometimes it's a spring. The women exchanged glances, their hearts softening. Asha remained by the fire, counting the baby's breaths, while Donna Zawada brought a bowl of warm milk and a linen cloth. That simple gesture opened the door for others. Baraka offered dry firewood. Juma silently fetched water from the pot. Even Sifu, hands black with soot, left a piece of coal by the door to keep the fire alive. Some still muttered about bad omens. Mamiya whispered that the river doesn't meddle in people's fate, but the child's brief cry echoed through the room and silenced the ill will, like snuffing a torch with a wet wick. Holding the child to his chest, Mwanza felt a tremor that wasn't fear. It was care. The house, once so empty, now had a new sound, and the village, though divided, couldn't look away from that miracle that had risen from the water. By late afternoon, there in front of the hut looked like a courtyard after rain footprints. Murmurs settled dust. Asha was the last to leave. "She needs warmth and patience," she said, rubbing ointment on her hands. "The rest, time, and God will take care of." Mwanza nodded, thanked her with a gesture, and went back inside. The crowd slowly dispersed into small groups, carrying with them fear, curiosity, and an uncomfortable seed of tenderness. By the time the sun touched the thatched rooftops, the rumor had already grown legs and reached the neighboring village dressed in X. Of course, some said the child glowed, others that the net sang. But in truth, there was only a tired man, a rescued girl, and a river that on that day decided to return what the world had tried to lose. And those who heard Mwanza quietly repeat to himself understood exactly where he had planted his feet if she was given to me by the waters. I accept what heaven allows. Man does not refuse. On the first night, Mwanza's house felt even smaller, filled with the sound of wind blowing through the cracks and the child's intermittent cries. The fisherman paced back and forth, clumsy, like someone walking on unfamiliar ground. He had never cared for a baby before, didn't even know where to start. He tried offering warm goat's milk in a gourd, but the girl coughed, refusing it. He sat by the fire, placed her on his chest, and began rocking slowly, humming an old tune Amina used to sing when the rain was about to fall. The crying gradually faded into soft sobs, and silence returned to the space. Mwanza looked at the girl's face, so small, so fragile, and felt a sharp pang of fear. Her skin was cold, her lips pale. He didn't know if it was illness, hunger, or fate itself. Testing his faith, he gathered his courage, took the cotton cloth Asher had left behind, and soaked it in a bowl of warm water with basil leaves. He wiped the baby's body gently, praying in a low voice, "May the waters that gave her also protect her. May the wind carry away the evil and bring her life." The moonlight poured through the window, casting shadows on the clay walls. Mwanza barely blinked. The girl slept, but the sound of her breathing kept him alert. With every short breath, the fisherman leaned in, making sure she was still alive. It was like watching over a newborn miracle. The fire burned low, and Mwanza stoked the embers from time to time, as if rekindling his own heart. The following days brought the same uncertainty. The fever came and went. Her crying ranged from loud to barely audible. Mwanza would go to the river at dawn, not to fish, but to collect clean water. There, kneeling by the water's edge, he asked for help from the elders who had passed, and from the God he believed still listened. The wind blew over the surface, and he took that as a sign. On the third day, Asha came again, bringing herbs and instructions. "Boil these leaves with honey and cinnamon. Give her 2 drops before sunset." Mwanza followed her directions carefully, watching as the girl swallowed the remedy with effort. When the crying stopped and her body relaxed, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time, he allowed himself to smile. A shy, tired smile, but a real one. In the early hours, the fisherman began talking to the fire, to the wind, to the silence itself. He spoke simple things, memories of Amina, old village tales, forgotten prayers. The girl slept in a small basket he had lined with cloths near the hearth. Sometimes she moved her arms in his sleep, as if swimming in dreams. Mwanza watched her, feeling something inside him shift and realign. There were nights when fear overtook him completely. He was afraid the fever would return. That fate would punish him by taking away what it had just given. In those moments, he'd step outside, look at the sky, and speak as if talking to a distant father. "Don't let me fail. If you've trusted me with this life, teach me how to protect it." Then he'd return and sit quietly, watching the fire slowly die out until sleep finally took him. Little by little, the silence in the house changed in tone. It was no longer empty. It was the silence of a place where hope breathes. Laughter hadn't yet returned, but the air was lighter. The fisherman began to notice details that used to go unnoticed. The song of the crickets, the smell of the neighbor's cornbread, the sunlight reflecting off the river at dawn. The girl whom he now called Nalia, a name that in his language meant she who was reborn from the waters, began to respond. Her once dull eyes gained color, her body strength. One day, when Mwanza tried to pick her up, she grabbed his finger tightly. It was a small gesture, but enough to break years of silence inside him. That night, the fisherman didn't need to pray out loud. His heart was already doing it for him. He sat beside the makeshift bed, watching Nalia asleep, and felt that his faith, once weakened, was alive again. It was no longer a distant belief, but something real, breathing right in front of him. The man who once spoke to Thariver, seeking comfort, now spoke to the sky in gratitude. Each beat of the girl's heart reminded him that God still performed quiet miracles, hidden in the gestures of those who refused to give up. And in the early hours, when the wind blew through the thatched roof, and the fire crackled one last time before going out, Mwanza understood that solitude had only been preparation, because it's in the empty house that love finds its deepest home. Time passed slowly beneath the thatched roof. Weeks turned into months, and the village gradually got used to little Nolia's presence. The scandal faded like foam after rain. The same women who once whispered at the market now stopped by Mwanza's hut to leave fruit, milk, small offerings. The old fisherman no longer walked hunched over. There was a new light in his step, a serenity even the river seemed to respect. But like all peace, this one also carried a foreboding. Sometimes Mwanza would wake in the middle of the night, heart racing, not knowing why. He'd go out into the yard, look toward the river, and see, reflected in its surface, the same gaze that had haunted him since the day he found the child. The gaze of someone who feels that something still remains unsaid. There were questions he avoided asking, as if afraid the answers would shatter the enchantment. One afternoon, while cleaning his boat, he saw a woman standing at the edge of the dirt road. She wore a dark headscarf and a worn dress, but her eyes carried a storm. She approached slowly without saying her name. She asked only if anyone in the area had seen a child, a small girl lost months ago. Her voice trembled between despair and guilt. Mwanza felt a chill. He invited her in, offered her water, and waited for her to speak. She looked around, restless, and then fixed her gaze on the corner where Nalia slept. Her body stiffened. She touched her chest, then the cloth on her head, and murmured something inaudible. "My daughter disappeared in the river," she finally said, her voice dry. "They say fate took her, but I feel she's still alive." Mwanza watched her in silence. The way she avoided his gaze, the nervous twisting of her hands, the absence of tears, everything felt off. Still, a part of him filled with pity. "The river returns what heaven allows," he said. "But not everything that returns belongs to the same hands." She looked at him confused. He continued, "Sometimes, life rewrites the path, and those who lost may be called to understand why." The woman lowered her head. "Do you believe in forgiveness?" she asked, her voice faltering. "I believe in justice," Mwanza replied. "But it doesn't always come the way we expect." A heavy silence followed. She stood, adjusted her headscarf, and said only, "If you see her, tell her mother is looking for her." Then she vanished down the trail, leaving behind the scent of rain and mystery. In the days that followed, Mwanza grew restless. The woman's presence seemed to have left a shadow in the house. Sometimes he'd watch Nalia playing in the yard and wonder if fate had played a trick on him. But every time he looked at the girl's smile, fear melted away. Love spoke louder than doubt. Even so, one thought clung to the fisherman's mind. The woman's words, "My daughter disappeared in the river," echoed like something the river itself would repeat. He began watching the riverbanks more closely, as if searching for traces of her past hidden among the waters. He asked Bobito quietly if any strangers had passed through in the previous months, and the old man simply replied, "When the waters hide something, it's because time hasn't chosen to reveal it yet." One night Mwanza dreamed. In the dream, the river ran red, and a woman walked on the water carrying a child in her arms. She extended the girl toward him, but when he tried to reach her, the waters closed like a mouth. He woke up sweating, heart pounding. The moon illuminated Nalia's peaceful, sleeping face. He knelt beside her bed and whispered a prayer. "If there's truth hidden, let it come without pain. But don't take from me what I've already learned to love." Deep down, the fisherman knew nothing that comes from the river comes without purpose. The silence of those waters held stories men weren't ready to bear, and somehow he felt the woman's arrival wasn't an ending, but a sign, a revelation about to rise. In the days that followed, Mwanza kept a watchful eye. The east wind brought heavy rains, and the river rose higher than it had in years. The fisherman watched the waters with suspicion, like someone reading ancient messages, and as thunder echoed in the distance, a certainty formed inside him. Nalia wasn't just the blessing. She was also an answer, and answers he knew never come without the heart paying the price. The years settled like fine dust on packed earth, and Mwanza's home grew fuller with new sounds beyond wind and fire. Nalia learned to walk, stumbling over her own feet, to laugh out loud when water splashed from the bucket, to call the fisherman Papa with the ease of someone who had found shelter in the right embrace. Each dawn when Mwanza returned from the river, his first gesture was always the same. He touched his forehead to hers and gave silent thanks. The old man no longer rode only for fish. He rode for bread, for notebooks, for the tiny sandals left by the door like two little birds. The village changed to Asha, the midwife taught Nalia how to braid straw and make herbal remedies. Donna Zawadi took her to the market to weigh tomatoes and learned the value of measurements. Baba Kito with his cane told stories of when the river was wilder and men less hurried. Nalia listened with shining eyes, and when she came home she retold the stories by the fire, reinventing them with such charm that Mwanza smiled without realizing it. There was a day when the rain lingered longer than expected, and fish grew scarce. Mwanza returned with almost empty nets and worry etched across his face. Nalia noticed before he said a word. She grabbed a handful of flour, improvised some fritters, and took them to a sick neighbor before eating herself. "If the pot is small, we just cut the piece smaller," she said, repeating one of Usha's sayings. The old fisherman felt a joy too big for his chest in the girl the river had given him. He saw the same generosity he had once learned from Amina. Suddenly the house had an inheritance. On a Sunday, Mwanza returned to the mud church he had long avoided. He sat on the last bench, shy, while Nalia, in a blue scarf, sang off-key but joyfully. After the blessing, Pastor Kanger took the fisherman's hand and spoke softly. "The man who takes in a life is blessed 3 times. By heaven, by earth, and by his own conscience." Mwanza didn't reply. He simply nodded, eyes moist. That night at home, he lit a candle beside the bed and whispered Amina's name, like someone setting a place at the table for someone who still lives in the heart. Mornings took on a new ritual. Before leaving, he'd place a small carved wooden boat on the doorstep. Nalia collected them on the window ledge like someone collecting promises. When Mwanza returned, she'd run to the shore and they'd walk side by side. He telling her about the shifting currents, she telling him about the village news. There was a rhythm between them, a simple music that only those who love each other recognized from afar. Some in the village stopped calling him the old man of the river and started calling him Nalia's father. The name the girl had given him became the name by which the world knew him, and that healed an old part of his pain. When someone out of malice whispered that the fate of a found child was to bring misfortune, Nalia lifted her chin and calmly replied, "I was found out of love." The words disarmed sharp tongues and made the last stones of judgment fall one by one. One August afternoon, the river was calm as if asleep, and Mwanza took Nalia to the dock. He handed her a light net and taught her the motion. "The secret is to respect the water and listen to the wind," he said, guiding her hands. The girl cast the net, missed, laughed, and tried again. When the net brought into small fish, she clapped and ran to hug her father. He closed his eyes for a moment and felt the world align. What life had denied him in a time of mourning, fate had returned in the form of a child who knew how to be thankful even for the little. That night after soup, Mwanza picked up the old drum he almost never played and tried a forgotten rhythm. Nalia danced with made-up steps, stumbling and starting over while the fire drew stars on the wall. Between one beat and another, the fisherman realized there was no longer a single place inside him where loneliness ruled. Attachment was no longer a chain, it was a root. Love was no longer a debt, it was home. And when the moon rose full and round, Nalia fell asleep against the fisherman's shoulder. He covered her gently, looked at the thatched roof, and spoke into the darkness, as if confessing a truth. "The river gave me back my voice." Then he blew out the lamp and let the good kind of silence fill the house. The kind of silence that only exists where love keeps watch. The years passed like the slow course of the river, silent yet steady. Nalia had grown into a young woman with eyes that reflected the calm of the waters and the strength of someone who had learned early on the value of faith. The village of Quail was proud of her. She helped with the harvests, healed wounds with the remedies she'd learned from Asher, and never left old Mwanza alone. He, now with hair as white as foam, told anyone who'd listen. "The river stole my youth, but gave me back my purpose. But life, like the tides, always shifts when least expected." On a sweltering November morning, a strange horse crossed the dirt road into the village. Riding it was a woman in a black headscarf, her gaze unsettled. No one recognized her at first, but Mwanza felt his body stiffen the moment she dismounted. It was the same look from years before, the one that had left a chill in his soul. This time she was accompanied by a tall man in fine clothing, arrogant posture, and the kind of eyes that never looked down at anyone. The entire village fell quiet watching. Mwanza and Nalia were on the porch cleaning the nets. When the strangers approached, the man spoke first, his voice dry and commanding. "We're looking for a young woman. They say she lives with a fisherman by the quail. She's the blood daughter of important people, and she was taken from where she didn't belong." Mwanza glanced at Nalia, who felt her heart pound without rising. The fisherman replied, "No one here takes what belongs to fate. What comes by water is sent by heaven." The man gave a crooked smile, cold and sharp. "The waters don't decide who belongs to whom," he said. The woman, the same who had once come searching for a lost child, lowered her head, unable to meet his eyes. Tension rippled through the village like the scent of heavy rain. Neighbors began to gather quietly, forming a ring of watchful eyes. Nalia felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. The man stepped forward, pointing at her. "This girl belongs to another name, another house. She's the daughter of a respected merchant, and you have no right to keep her here." The words dropped like stone. Mwanza stood slowly. His voice, when it came, was calm but unshakable. "A daughter is someone God entrusts to you, not someone claimed by gold. This girl was given to me alive when others left her to die. There's no name more pure than the one the river gave her." The man stepped forward, furious. "Watch your words, old man. The world has laws." Mwanza raised his head, and in his eyes the village saw something long dormant. The strength of a man who no longer feared loss, because he had already lost everything once. "And so does heaven," he answered. "And its laws are older than yours." The woman in black, trembling, tried to intervene. "Enough, D, that's enough." His name echoed. She was crying, but her tears were born of fear, not remorse, Mwanza noticed. He understood in that moment. The truth didn't lie in the man's threats. It was hidden in the woman's silence. Asha, the midwife, broke through the crowd and stood at the fisherman's side. "This girl was raised with love. If anyone wants to take her, they'll have to go through us." Other women joined her. Denora, Zawadi, Mamiya, even those who had once doubted. The men stepped forward too, silent but resolute. The whole village seemed to breathe as one, like the river before it overflows. The man stepped back, surprised by the resistance. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he spat from the crowd. Babaito answered, "Oh, we do. We're dealing with the truth, and the truth isn't for sale, nor does it hide behind a suit." Silence followed, thick as river mud. The wind kicked up dust, and Mwanza took a step forward, opening his arms protectively in front of Nalia. "No one takes what God has entrusted to me." The man looked around, saw he wouldn't win, and pulled the woman by the arm. "We're leaving," he growled. She looked at Nalia one last time, her eyes full of something that looked like regret, then turned and left without a word. When the horse's hooves disappeared down the road, the village exhaled. Nalia dropped to her knees, face in her hands, and Mwanza wrapped her in a long, tight embrace. The women wept, the men nodded. The danger had passed for now. But Mwanza knew the river still held hidden currents. As the sun sank behind the trees, the fisherman looked to the horizon and murmured, "The waters brought love, but also truths I'm not sure I'm ready to hear." The wind blowing in from the river seemed to reply in its usual way, with the ancient voice of a fate that never falls silent. The news of the stranger's return spread quickly through the village, blending with the distant sound of drums and the restlessness of the tides. The sun had not yet fully risen when Mwanza noticed that the river felt different, heavier, murkier, as if it too sensed what was coming. Nalia, who had woken before him that morning, stood at the window, eyes fixed on the horizon. The silence between them said everything words could not. Fear had returned. They spent the day on alert. Mwanza mended nets that didn't need mending. Nalia washed the same dish 3 times. Time dragged, the hours weighed with waiting, and when afternoon began to fade, a cloud of dust appeared on the road to the dock. The old fisherman raised his eyes and saw the same tall man, Don, now with 2 others. Behind them the woman in black, her face covered. The village retreated into stillness, but no one stayed far. Asha, Barbara, and a few neighbors quietly approached, forming a circle of respect and tension. Darren walked with measured steps, his gaze hard. Hes stopped in front of Mwanza and pointed at Nalia. "The truth can no longer be hidden. This girl belongs to me, to the blood I carry and the name I protect. She was taken from the river, but the river took her by my order. She was never meant to exist." His words struck like thunder. Mwanza's face still replied, "God never signed your order. He returned what you tried to erase." Darren laughed a dry, bitter laugh. "You're just a poor old man with no land and no name. What do you think you can do against me?" Mwanza stepped forward, his body steady despite the years. "I can do what any just man can. I will not stay silent in the face of cowardice. And this girl is not your shame. She is your salvation if you still have a soul left." The woman in black who had been silent now cried quietly, "Enough, Darren. We've heard enough." He shoved her aside, furious. Nalia, who until then had stayed still, stepped forward, placing herself between her adoptive father and the man. "Don't touch me. Your blood may run through me, but my heart does not belong to you," Darren faltered. For a moment the mask of power fell, and his face showed something close to fear. "Be quiet, girl," he shouted. "You don't know what you're doing." "Yes, I do," Nalia replied firm. "You wanted me dead to hide your sin. But the river returned me to remind you. God doesn't erase what love has rescued." The silence broke with a growing murmur. People from the village came closer. Asha raised her chin. "She is one of us." Baba Kito tapped his kanet on the ground and declared, "The river does not return curses. It returns justice." The men accompanying Darren shifted, clearly uneasy. The presence of those simple, united people weighed more than the merchant's gold. Darren tried to move forward, but Mwanza opened his arms in front of his daughter. "No one takes what God has entrusted to me." His voice cut through the air. The people responded with a sound that was not a shout, but a chorus of resolve, a murmur of faith that filled the space. Darren, seething, reached for a knife at his belt. But before he could take a step, one of the women, Mama, threw a bucket of washwater on him. The village burst into laughter, nervous but real, and that laugh broke the spell of fear. Soaked and humiliated, Darren looked around and realized he was surrounded. The fisherman, voice calm, said, "Leave, Darren. The river has already judged you. It doesn't drown the innocent, but it never forgets those who try to deceive it." The woman in black, trembling, grabbed his arm and pleaded, "Enough! Let's go. What fate spared cannot be taken back." Don looked on last time at the crowd and saw the disdain in their eyes. He spit on the ground and turned his back. The horses thundered down the road, carrying away the last of his shame when the sound of hooves faded into the distance. The doc exhaled relief. Nalia turned to Mwanza and embraced him tightly. "You saved Megan, Papa." He looked into her eyes and answered, "It was love that saved you. I was just the boat." Usher wiped away a tear and whispered, "The river is just. It returns the truth when the time is right." As the sun set, painting the river gold, the villagers quietly dispersed. Mwanza and Nalia remained at the water's edge. Watching the current dot, the old fisherman murmured. "Today the river ran clear," Nalia replied, "and tomorrow it will too, because no lie outlasts the tide." Night fell over Quail, and the wind brought the scent of firewood and peace. The confrontation was over, but the water still held stories to tell, and in that moment, as the river continued its path, Mwanza knew goodness, even weary, always finds the strength to stand. The days that followed brought a heavy silence to the village. People spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid to awaken something still slumbering beneath the waters. Mwanza and Nalia returned to their routines, but the air hung thick with foreboding. The old fisherman avoided the river at dawn. He merely watched it from the bank, wary like someone speaking with an old friend who holds a secret too big to bear. Nalia, in turn, tried to go about her days as usual, but Mwanza's distant gaze unsettled her. She knew there was something caught in his chest, something the wind kept trying to whisper but never finished saying. One afternoon, as the sun dipped in shades of copper, a messenger arrived in the village. He had come from afar, weary, bearing a letter addressed to Pastor Kanger. The people gathered in the square as the pastor read it aloud, each word falling like a stone into water. The letter came from the capital, and it bore a name, Darren the Merchant. Its contents were brief, but enough to change everything. The man had been denounced by his own wife, accused of adultery, fraud, and attempting to conceal the birth of an illegitimate daughter. The pastor lifted his eyes and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Everyone remembered the day that Merchant had arrived full of arrogance, demanding Nalia be returned. Now the truth stood bare, clean and undeniable. The baby thrown to the river had been the product of a hidden sin, a child who threatened the pride of a powerful man. The woman in black, silenced for years, had finally confessed it all, that her husband had ordered the girl's death, that she had handed the child to a servant to be rid of the shame, and that she had lived ever since with a broken heart. Mwanza listened quietly, sitting on the same bench where he used to mend his nets. The village approached him with respect, but no one dared break the silence. Nalia stood nearby, her eyes glistening. When the murmuring faded and the crowd dispersed, she knelt beside him and asked, "So this is why the river brought me back, because the world didn't want me?" Mwanza took his time to answer. His weathered face was lit by the light of dusk. "No, daughter," he said in a deep voice. "The river doesn't return what the world rejected. It returns what heaven refused to lose." Nalia wept quietly, and Mwanza pulled her into a long embrace, as if protecting the miracle that had been entrusted to him. That night, the entire village lit candles in front of their homes. It was an act of reparation, A silent prayer for the child's sin had tried to erase, and for the truth that time had finally brought to the surface. Pastor Kanga spoke few words, but they were enough to seal the moment. God delivers justice in equal measure to the efforts man makes to hide his wrongs, and when he chooses to reveal the truth, not even the river can silence him. The next day, the messenger returned to the road, carrying the echo of the confession with him. Darren's name now traveled through neighboring villages as a warning, a tale of shame and downfall. They said the man had fled, consumed by guilt, and that his fortune, built on deceit, was dissolving like salt in water. His wife, repentant, had asked to meet with Mwanza and Nalia, but the fisherman refused. "Forgiveness belongs to God," he said. "Memory belongs to us." When the sun rose again, the Quail River ran more peacefully. Mwanza, with a lighter heart, walked to the shore and cast his net, not out of need, but out of gratitude. When he pulled it in, he found only a single small silver fish shining under the morning light. He smiled. Today, the river brought me no burden, only a sign. Behind him, Nalia watched. The pain of her origins no longer weighed as heavily. The love she had received was stronger than any shame. She walked to her father, took his hand and said, "If one day they ask me where I came from, I'll say I was born from the waters and from the heart of a just man." Mwanza looked at her and replied, "Then the world will know that goodness also has descendants." In that moment, the river seemed to sing. The waters lapped against the stones like quiet applause. The village at last understood. What had once been cast into oblivion had returned to teach that destiny never misses its address. It simply waits for the right time to reveal itself. The days following the revelation brought a strange calm to the village, like the hush that lingers after a great storm. Life in Quail slowly returned to its rhythm, but there was a new kind of respect in the eyes that met Mwanza and Nea along the paths. They were no longer just the old man and the girl found in the river. They had become living symbols of a justice that had come from the waters older than any law written by men. One morning, as the sun barely kissed the mountain peaks, a traveler arrived in the village. He rode an exhausted horse and had his face covered in dust. The people watched from afar as he dismounted and walked toward Mwanza's hut. The fisherman was sitting at the door, sharpening an old fishing knife, and he recognized the man before a single word was spoken. It was dawn, but the proud posture was gone. The one's surrogate eyes had become hollow shadows, and the body that once wore silk now clung to rags. Darren stopped in front of Mwanza and bowed his head. "I've come to ask for what I'm not sure I deserve," he said. Voice hoarse, "I've come to ask for forgiveness." The silence that followed was so heavy that even the wind seemed to pause. Mwanza stood slowly, looked the man in the eyes, and replied, "Forgiveness isn't begged for on your knees before the one you hurt. It's sought standing before God so he may return to you the weight of what you've done." Darren breathed deeply, trying to hold back tears. "I spent my life believing power could hide my wrongs. Now I carry the name, but I've lost my soul. The woman I mistreated has left me. My fortune has turned to ash, and the sound of the river follows me. Every night I hear the cry of the child I ordered to die." Mwanza listened without moving, like someone who hears the echo of a pain long past. Nalia stepped out of the house and stood in the doorway watching in silence. For a moment, past and present, stood face to face the man who once tried to destroy her and the father who had saved her. Darren saw her and broke down in tears. "I killed you in my heart before you were even born. And still God kept you alive to condemn me." Nalia stepped forward and spoke with steady voice. "Not to condemn you, to remind you." Her words cut through there like a blade. Darren fell to his knees, hands trembling. "I have nothing to offer, only regret." Mwanza placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "Then offer that to the one you owe, not to me. The evil done to the innocent isn't paid with gold, nor with tears. It's paid by living the rest of your days in truth." Dunn wept in silence. Nalia looked at him with a mix of pity and compassion. "You tried to steal my right to exist," she said. "But God gave me something greater, the right to forgive." The merchant lifted his eyes and saw something he'd never seen before, the peace of someone who had triumphed without hatred. "I don't deserve your kindness," he murmured. "Forgiveness isn't a prize," she replied. "It's freedom, and you need it more than I do." Duran said goodbye with a simple gesture. Unable to look back, he mounted his horse and rode off, carrying the weight of what remained of himself. Mwanza and Nalia watched his figure vanish around the bend. The fisherman sighed. He tried to extinguish the light, but ended up learning to walk in the dark. In the months that followed, Darren was seen only once working in a small northern village, digging wells and building shelters. They said the man who once sold luxury now worked with his hands, in silence, seeking redemption, on the same soil he once looked down on. Meanwhile, in Quail, time flowed on. Now Leah grew older, married a young fisherman, and had children who ran along the river bank. where old Mwanza liked to sit and tell stories. He aged with the serenity of someone who had fulfilled his purpose. One morning, already frail, he asked to be taken to the dock. Nalia went with him. The sun was rising, and the river flowed calmly, as if offering him a farewell. Mwanza looked at his daughter and said, "Goodness doesn't need to be seen to exist. It only needs to flow like water, and it will find its way." When the old fisherman passed, was Nalia who scattered his ashes into the river, the same river that had once given her life. The waters embraced him silently, and the wind blew gently across her face. Time moved on, but the village never forgot. And each time the river reflected the morning sun, someone would remember. This is where love overcame fear and forgiveness fell like rain upon the shame of men. The Quail River, once a place of sorrow, became a symbol of new beginnings, a living testament that destiny, even when it seems cruel, knows how to reward the hearts that choose love over hate. Time passed over Quail like an ancient breeze, bringing stories, taking them away, but never erasing the memory of the fisherman and the girl the river returned. The waters of the Quail, once feared and surrounded by superstition, had become sacred in the eyes of the people. It was there, on those same riverbanks where fate met faith, that many now came to pray, not for wealth or luck, but for courage. The same courage Mwanza once had to embrace life when the world only saw disgrace. Nia, now an old woman, had become the keeper of that story. She raised children and grandchildren with the same love she once received, teaching them that the worth of a person is not found in bloodlines, but in the good they choose to do. Her hands, marked by time, still knew how to tend the earth, heal wounds, and point the way forward. Sometimes she would sit by the river and speak to herself, just as her father once had. She said the wind carried God's answers, and you only needed a clean heart to hear them. The people of the village learned from them that destiny, though slow, never forgets the just. Many began to say that Mwanza was not just a fisherman, but a messenger of the river itself. And when someone doubted miracles, there was always one answer. Ask the Quail, it knows what justice is. Nalia kept her father's old boat, worn and faded like a relic. She used it to carry dried flowers, and from time to time she'd let them drift with the current. She said the river had a memory, and somehow it carried her prayers to where the sky begins. The elders would say that on full moon nights, you could hear the sound of soft oars cutting the surface, as if Mwanza still rode among the shadows watching over the living dot. As Nali grew old, her simple house remained standing firm like the trunk of an ancient tree. Her children urged her to move to the city, but she always replied, "One who was born of the river never strays far from it. If it is God's will, let me rest in it too." And so it was. On the day she passed, the sky was clear, and the Quail ran calm. As if waiting, the entire village gathered to honor her. Her body was wrapped in a white cloth, and by her wish, her ashes were cast into the water. In the very place where decades before old Mwanza had pulled from Theriver, the small bundle that changed both their lives. The sound of the waves blended with the quiet sobs of the people, and for a moment, time stood still. One of the grandsons, a curious boy, asked Pastor Kenga, "Did Grandma go to heaven?" The man smiled and replied, "She did. But before going up, she stopped at the river because the path of the just always passes through water." From that day on, the village kept the tradition of celebrating the day of the miracle of the waters. Not out of vanity, but out of gratitude. The women adorned the dock with flowers. Themen floated small lanterns down the river, and the children retold the story as if in prayer, and the Quail glowed under the light of the candles, its trembling reflection like a choir of stars descending to the earth. It was the river's way of reminding everyone that goodness, even when cast into the waters of sorrow, always finds its way back. And so the fisherman and the girl became part of what is eternal. The faith that withstands time, the love that heals fear, and the destiny that when guided by pure hands can turn even the darkest shipwreck into salvation. To this day, anyone passing through Quail hears the same story told beside the fire. The fisherman cast his nets, but pulled from the river a bound child still alive. And as the storyteller repeats those final words, a hush falls over the crowd. Because everyone knows the miracle wasn't that the river returned the girl. The miracle was that the man believed she deserved to live. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our